In countries where financial literacy is low and access to credit is limited, individuals may resort to taking out high-interest loans for short-term consumption, such as purchasing a car they can't afford or luxury items, rather than investing in long-term assets such as education, training, or starting an innovation-focused business. Such countries are mostly warm climate-poor countries in the world today. Such impulsive buying behavior driven by an inclination towards short-term gain can lead to a cycle of debt and financial insecurity, which can have long-term negative effects on individuals and society as a whole. In contrast, in societies with a preference for long-term gain, those being societies with a history of cold climate agriculture, individuals tend to prioritize investments in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. This can be seen in the way people in developed countries handle their finances, such as saving for retirement or investing in the stock market, with a long-term focus. Additionally, governments in these colder countries have throughout recent history invested much more in long-term infrastructure projects, such as public transportation and renewable energy, which benefits society in the long run but may not provide immediate economic returns. Overall, the difference in preference for short versus long-term gain in financial and monetary usage can have significant implications for societal development and progress. By promoting financial literacy and providing access to credit for long-term investments, societies can help shift individuals' mindsets towards long-term gain, which can lead to greater prosperity and stability in the long run via better use of monetary resources. The preference for short-term gain is influenced by ancestral agriculture, and the environment is not just limited to consumer finance and monetary usage, but it is also exhibited in the way that developing countries handle loan programs and foreign aid. This issue is especially pronounced in countries that have not fully transitioned to long-term strategic thinking and cooperation as an innate aspect of their culture. In many cases, developing countries that receive aid or loan programs from developed countries often end up misusing the funds, leading to an increase in indebtedness and a vicious cycle of reliance on aid. This can be seen in the case of many African countries that have been receiving foreign aid for decades, yet continue to be stuck in a cycle of poverty and underdevelopment. The preference for short-term gain often leads to the mismanagement of these funds, with the focus being on immediate consumption rather than long-term investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. This is evidenced by the corruption index tracked by Transparency International and proves that the so-called developing warm climate third world countries are ineffectively receiving foreign aid for decades, and the reason for the ineffectiveness is the natural psychology of the recipients and its cumulative effect, which leads to corruption and misuse of funds, as the recipient's natural psychology prevents them from being able to wait and use the funds for the long-term delayed benefit for their broader society. To address this issue, there needs to be a greater understanding and awareness of the natural psychology of those who are more prone to preferring short-term gain. This requires socially responsible finance that takes into account the unique cultural and historical backgrounds of the countries in question. One possible solution is to develop aid programs that are tailored to the specific needs and capabilities of each country, rather than providing a one-size-fits-all solution. This may involve working closely with local governments and communities to identify the most pressing needs and ensuring that the funds are used in a responsible and sustainable way. This is not a light matter and should be taken seriously, as an inordinate amount of human suffering can be attributed not just to natural psychology but due to the ignorance of this scientific fact and global inclination towards political correctness that all peoples of the world are inherently the same without any difference in natural psychology. This is wrong and is the source of the ever-widening socio-economic gap between first and third world countries today. One possible solution is to prioritize investment in education and other long-term infrastructure projects that have the potential to provide sustainable economic growth and development. This may involve the government and NGOs partnering with local communities and businesses to identify the most promising areas for investment and ensuring that the necessary resources and expertise are provided. However, for this to be effective, the aid providers and recipient handlers must accept the difference in natural psychology and handle the distribution and application of the aid accordingly. The preference for short-term gain is influenced by ancestral agriculture, and the environment is a significant challenge facing many developing countries. To overcome this challenge, there needs to be a greater understanding and awareness of the natural psychology of those who are more prone to preferring short-term gain. This requires socially responsible finance and investment that takes into account the unique cultural, historical and ethno-psychological backgrounds of the countries in question. By investing in long-term infrastructure projects and prioritizing sustainable economic growth, it is possible to break the cycle of indebtedness and ensure that developing countries are able to achieve sustainable economic development and prosperity. However, this would need to be guided by an eminent domain where the authority ensures development funds are used as per their original intent. Charity work is indeed an admirable act of kindness that aims to help those in need. However, it is not a long-term solution to the underlying issues that cause poverty and underdevelopment. It delays the inevitable need for societies to accept and understand the differences in natural psychology and impose governance accordingly. Two great examples of countries that managed to successfully transition from third world to first world status are the United Arab Emirates, UAE, and Singapore. These countries recognized that the key to development is good governance and strict law enforcement. They put in place institutions and policies that promote long-term strategic planning and cooperation, as well as sustainable growth. However, it is key to note that neither of these countries follow the same system of governance as a free-market Western-style democracy but rather practice a custom-blended hybrid model. And this is the reason they have been able to make this transition. In the case of the UAE, its government has invested heavily in infrastructure and has adopted an open economy policy that encourages foreign investments and trade. The country has also established free zones and tax incentives for businesses to attract foreign investors. These initiatives have enabled the UAE to diversify its economy and reduce its dependence on oil exports. The government has also implemented strict regulations and laws that promote transparency and accountability, such as anti-money laundering and anti-corruption laws. However, it is important to note that there is no Western-style parliamentary or presidential democracy there. It has its own custom system of government which I contend is tailored to the natural psychology of its native inhabitants and those who live there. Similarly, Singapore has focused on good governance and strict law enforcement to transform itself from a poor underdeveloped country into one of the most developed and prosperous nations in the world. Singapore's government has implemented a comprehensive system of policies and institutions that promote economic growth, social stability, and environmental sustainability. It has also established a highly efficient and corruption-free public sector that promotes transparency and accountability. Singapore's success is rooted in its culture of hard work, discipline, and long-term strategic planning. But more importantly, it must be noted that Singapore implemented a unique and tailored system of government. This, I contend, was a thought-out and planned implementation, which is why the resulting economic success occurred. Singapore's governance is often described as a hybrid model that combines elements of Western-style democracy with authoritarianism. While there are regular elections and a parliament with multiple parties, the People's Action Party, PAP, has dominated Singapore's politics since its independence in 1965. One key difference between Singapore's governance and Western-style democracy is the emphasis on collective over individual rights. Singapore's government has prioritized the common good and social harmony over individual freedoms, which can lead to restrictions on free speech and assembly. This approach is grounded in the belief that in order for their country to be a stable and prosperous society, it requires a stronger government that can enforce the rule of law more strictly than in Western developed countries. Another notable difference is the central role that the government plays in Singapore's economy. The government has a strong hand in directing economic policy and shaping the country's economic development. This has led to a high level of government intervention in the economy, with policies aimed at promoting growth and maintaining social stability. This is different from Western governance. In terms of law enforcement, Singapore is known for its strict approach to maintaining law and order. The government has implemented a range of laws and policies aimed at reducing crime and maintaining social order. For example, the country has harsh penalties for drug offenses and vandalism. Singapore is also known for its use of public shaming, such as caning, as a punishment for certain crimes. Compared to Western countries, Singapore's approach to law enforcement can be seen as more punitive and less focused on rehabilitation. While Western countries often prioritize rehabilitation and reducing recidivism rates, Singapore places a greater emphasis on punishment as a deterrent to crime. While these differences may be controversial in some Western countries, they reflect Singapore's unique history, culture, and values. These points suggest that Singapore has built a custom-tailored system of government suited to meet their needs, and their harsher enforcement of the law suggests they are compensating for the natural psychology of its people, since it is influenced by hospitable warm climate agriculture. They have built a system of government that is unique and tailored to their people's nature. The key to development is good governance, strict law enforcement, and long-term strategic planning, and most importantly, tailored governance to the natural psyche of people. Countries that recognize the differences in natural psychology and impose governance accordingly are the ones that have successfully transitioned from third world to first world status. The examples of the UAE and Singapore show that success is achievable with discipline, hard work, and cooperation. However, the natural psychology of the inhabitants of a region must be accepted and not denied, and governance must be implemented accordingly. This concept of natural psychology and its impact on societies has been evident in various aspects of life. One example is how the preference for short-term gain over long-term benefits affects the construction industry in developing countries. Contractors in these countries are known for cutting costs by using inferior materials, overlooking safety standards, and disregarding building codes, in a bid to maximize profit in the short term. This is in contrast to developed countries, where safety and quality standards are strictly enforced, and the use of high-quality materials and advanced technology is prioritized over cost-cutting. At the time of the writing of this book, Turkey and Syria experienced a devastating 7.8 magnitude earthquake just a few weeks prior, and the devastation there is unimaginable. However, when such an earthquake occurs in an advanced developed country, the devastation is much less pronounced. So, this suggests the root cause of the suffering of the victims of the earthquake is not the natural event, but rather the notion that those countries are not governing based on the acceptance of the natural psychology of their people, which is geared towards short-term gain, cutting corners for the quick benefit of the self while sacrificing unknowingly their future by ignoring the broader consequences of their actions. If there is an element to blame for this disaster, it is unfortunately nature. However, since man cannot influence nature, we must accept the natural psyche of people and educate them so they can implement compensated systems of governance so their society functions better. The 2010 earthquake in Haiti caused much more devastation and loss of life than an earthquake of similar magnitude in Japan, despite the fact that Japan experiences significantly more earthquakes than Haiti. The difference can be attributed to the fact that Japan has stricter building codes and higher safety standards, while Haiti's construction industry is plagued by corruption and a focus on short-term profits. These issues highlight the need for societies to understand and accept the differences in natural psychology, instead of attempting to deny or ignore them. By recognizing the reality of these differences, societies can create governance structures and institutions that account for them, and develop policies that are designed to address the underlying causes of the issue. For example, governments can implement policies that incentivize contractors to prioritize quality and safety over cost-cutting, or establish strict regulations and standards to ensure that buildings are constructed to withstand potential disasters, or punish those who try to cut corners for short-term gains and profits. Overall, it is clear that the preference for short-term gain over long-term benefits is a major issue that affects many aspects of life in developing countries. However, it is important for societies to recognize that this tendency is a natural result of historical and environmental factors, and to work towards finding solutions that are tailored to their specific circumstances. Only by doing so can they effectively address the underlying causes of the issue and pave the way for sustainable development and progress. Denial of differences in natural psychology is extremely dangerous and is the cause of the suffering of millions.